So in this video, we're going to talk about arrays or Python lists and how to kind of translate between Cambridge pseudocode and Python code. So in Python, we have lists, right? So I can say things, and then I can make a list. And what I can do is I can change the size of the list as I want. I can continuously make the list bigger by appending items to the list. So this is populating a list. You need to understand the difference between an array and a list is that a list is variable size, whereas we have arrays which are fixed size, populating an array. So in pseudocode, just like any other variable, I need to declare before I use my array. So in order to declare things, I need to say, how many things will there be? And what will the array contain? So in this case, it's string. So this is saying, declare my things from index 0 up to index 9 inclusive. And this is going to be an array of strings. So once again, as you watch these videos, you should be looking at just shown you the wrong syntax. So let's do it the correct way. So the index bit needs to be next to the array here. So yeah, so this is the syntax for declaring an array. When we have the array, then it can't change size because it's fixed size. So I don't have the option to just append. What I would need to do to model this code is to reference the first element and then to put in my first value. And then again, and then again. So this would be the kind of syntactical equivalent of appending to a list. In this case, I'm populating element 0, element 1, element 2 with my values instead. Let's talk about now how you should model that if doing Python code. It's a similar principle, but rather than an array can never be empty, so you need to create an array with null values for a fixed number of elements, so in this case 10 elements. And then I can use the same syntax to assign to the first 3 elements. So if we were using a list in Python, it would look like this. If we are using an array in Python, it would look like this. This is the equivalent in pseudocode. So let's talk about subscription. So this is the action of subscription. Let's say I want to access one of the elements, output things at 0. This is how I would subscript. In Python, it would be print things at 0. Let's say I want to output every element. Let's say something like for I in range, and because an array is fixed size, we can just count through the indices and print each thing, subscript into the array and print each thing. How would that look in pseudocode? Well, we haven't done for loops yet, but it's for I is 0 to 9 inclusive, output things at I, and, next I. So this is the syntax for a for loop, which we'll come on to in a future video. Let's just see what that does. So in Python, it prints out the first 3 values and then my null values. So this is the kind of equivalent of working with arrays and subscripting. What you need to understand is when you work with lists, we have access to all these special methods. We can pop from a list to take something out. We can remove a specific value from a list. But all of these actions, they change the size of the list. And because an array has a fixed number of elements, you cannot do that. So the term array in terms of the exam board is that it has a fixed number of size. So if I want to remove element 0, how would I do that? Well, the equivalent will be take things at index 0 and replace it with a null value. In this case, maybe it would be appropriate to use an empty string because it's an array of strings. So that's how we would take something out. We can't do the remove option. How would I do it? I would need to say something like for thing in things, if thing is equal to the thing we want to remove, then let's take things at the current position and replace it with blank. And then we need to keep this current position, right? So in this case, in Python, if I have access to all of the different options in Python, I would use enumerate and things. But because of what you're doing is like a limited version for year 12, this is, you need to think of the pseudo equivalent. So whilst I might just be able to do this in Python to remove something from an array, how would that look in sort of Cambridge International pseudocode? So I can't just pop. I need to say loop through all of my elements for I in range. If the current things at the position is equal to the thing I want to remove, then remove that thing, replace it with the thing. So something like that would be removing a specific element from the array. Is there anything else? Oh, so now let's talk about 2D arrays. So again, no append, no pop, no remove. If we want to declare a 2D array, for example, a grid of numbers or something, let's call it grid. And then the syntax for this is array 0 to 9, 0 to 3 of integer. Let's just check that against the pseudocode guide. Yeah, so the lower and the upper, and then the lower and the upper of integer. But this is a syntax for creating like a grid, a two-dimensional array. This would put something in the first row in the final column. This is 10 rows of 4 columns. This is how I could put something in to populate the array. How would that look in my Python kind of version? So I'd use something similar to this. This would need to be a nested. So in this case, it's appropriate for an integer to be initialized to null, I think. In this case, I'm going to use a nested list comprehension. So this is just syntax you need to learn. This is put in 10 nons, and then we want to do that 4 times. So this is how I would make a grid of, well, a 4 by 10 grid. And then this syntax should work. So now let's run this program, and then let's just make sure my remove is not working. Running rather. Let's print the grid. I should see my rows in my grid, and then at 1 column in the first row I changed it to 54. We'll look at for loops in a future video. A common design pattern is to need to use a nested loop to loop through every element in every row. So let's say something like output grid at row I at column J. What we might want to do here is output a new line. This is what we said was difficult to understand the expectations. So I would assume using the new line character is fine at this point. So this is how we would loop through and print every. Oh, I've made a mistake. This should be 3, not 4, right? Because one thing to understand is that it's inclusive in pseudocode, but exclusive in Python, as it doesn't include the upper bound. How would this look in Python? Well, let's stick to using for I in range 10, for j in range 4, print grid at I at j. Every time I then want to print a new line. But in Python, because the new line is there by default, I need to use this end character. And then let's see what this does. So maybe let's initialize everything to 7. Let's change this to 9. And when we run the program, we get an error because I need to flip this around, don't I? So j to I. So this would be columns, and this would be rows. So this is 4 rows of 10 columns rather than what I said. Let's have a look at how that looks. Oh, no, it is 10 columns. Anyway, there you go. So what have I got? I've got it is 10 columns of 4 rows. No, sorry, I'm getting confused. I'm very tired. Okay, it is 10 rows of 4 columns, right? If I change these around, and then that was obviously reshape the array, but then that's going to cause this code not to work properly. I guess I could have changed either way, and then that would have had the same impact, right? You can see that affects the position that we're changing. So it's probably best to think of it as this is actually your y because you're looping through the rows. This is your x, and we're saying go into the grid, get row y, get column x. So this is row 0, and this is column 3. So this is a little bit about working with 2-dimensional and 1-dimensional arrays using the example of pseudocode, and why you can't really use lists, because the Cambridge International syllabus only supports an array.